Hello, thank you for checking out my video. Today what we're doing is looking at writing and interpret functions. Writing and interpret function. So what I want you to be able to do here is to see the function in real world context and figure out the different parts to it. Okay, so for instance, here on this first example, we got Chloe is driving along a highway at a speed of 60 miles per hour. And it wants you to answer the question below regarding the relationship between distance and time. So we always been dealing with function notation. F of x is replaced with a y, but we're dealing with x and y. Okay, and x is your input or your independent variable, and y is your output, or f of x is your output, your dependent variable. The y depends upon the x. Once we know x, we can find y. But of course we can work it the other way around when you have the numbers, but in a real world context, one is independent and one is dependent. Okay, so let me show you what I'm talking about. So here I've got a little table set up. So here it says Chloe is driving along the highway at a speed of 60 miles per hour. So let's say she drives 1 hour, and how many miles is that? 60. Well, let's say she drives 2 hours. How many miles is that? 120. 3 hours. How many miles is that? 180. So we can figure out how many miles she drove if we know how many hours she's driving. Okay? So the miles driven is dependent upon the hours driven. So we know that the independent is the x and the dependent is the f of x or the y. Okay, so what we would do is go back in here and put that in. It says the independent variable x represents what? Is it the distance traveled or the time or the hours driven? Well, it's the hours driven. Okay, and the dependent variable is the other thing, the distance traveled, the miles driven. Okay, because the miles driven is dependent upon the number of hours, or I should say the miles traveled is dependent upon the number of hours driven. Okay, so now, so that's just the wording on how you get it set up, and this will always be in this order. You'll have the x, then the y, then the y, and then the x. Okay, now I'm gonna go back to this table here. Now, what if we knew how many hours we driven? Can we figure out how many miles has been? How many hours driven? Can we figure out how many miles has been traveled? Okay. Well, the way we do it is if we multiply the number of hours times 60, then we can figure that out. So we would just type in 60 times the number of hours driven. So we put in an x. So this represents the number of hours driven, and we'll multiply it times 60. But if we take that and let's say it is 5 hours, which is the example they give us here, we'll take the 5 and multiply it times 60, and you get 300 miles. And the way it will look as the notation would be 60 times 5 gives you 300. So that's what it's asking next here. We'll say the 5, and it's going in for your x. So when you do that, you get 300. Meaning after 5 hours driven, you get 300. Come on. Miles. So that's all we're doing. We're just interpreting the input and the output and dropping in and filling in the blanks here. Alright, let's take a look at another example. Alright, so Caden's buying bagels for a family gathering. Each bagel costs $1.50. It says answer the question below regarding the relationship between the total cost and the number of bagels purchased. So the independent variable X represents what? Well, in order to figure out the total cost, we need to know how many bagels she's buying. So the cost is dependent upon the bagels purchased. Okay, so we're going to put that in first. It will say the total number of bagels represents the X, and the dependent variable is the actual cost of the bagels. Because the total cost of the bagels depends on the number of bagels purchased. Alright, so then what are we going to multiply the number of bagels that we buy by? We're going to multiply it by 150. So you can just put 150 here. And an X, because you don't know how many bagels. Now in this next line it tells you R of 18. So 18 is what we're going to multiply times 150. And when we do, we get 27. Alright, so what does that mean? Okay, the meaning of 18, number of bagels, look, 18 bagels will cost $27. And that's pretty much it. That is how you write and interpret functions. I want to thank you for checking out my video. Have a nice day.